So my name's Kat Johnson. I work at Khan Academy right now. I'm a senior front-end developer. I specialize in accessibility. And I feel like for the most part, I just love talking about accessibility and front-end development and how to build and create inclusive, socially impacting technology.
Tell us a little bit about your claim to fame so far. I think you've given a couple of presentations, so it'd be interesting to know what all you've done.
I have talked at Remix Conference. I think my biggest claim to fame was I did a really fun talk last year at React Summit US. I was featured in an article about React Summit, and I was like one of the 4 speakers they highlighted, which I was so like, wow, I'm famous. I'm low-key famous in developer communities at least. But that's mostly been most of my impact is doing conferencing circuits in like front-end development spaces. I have a fun website that a lot of people seem to like. I enjoy having fun with the UX of the website and playing around with it a little bit.
So you said you had some cool UX and accessibility stuff on here. I can totally see. Yeah, tell me about it. I would love to know.
Yeah, mostly I built this site using, I think it's called 11D. It's just a really basic front-end markup language. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. So that was the key when I built my website. Was I wanted it to look nice, but I also wanted to give it like my own sort of flair and incorporate some things that I wanted to present on my website. So I even found a free template that someone built. And I just took that template and I just ripped the guts out of it and then changed all the styling. I created my sort of logo right here, Cat in the Machines, in Adobe editor. Just I fiddled around for a little bit. I'm not an expert in Adobe. I learned just enough to accomplish some of the designs on this website, and that was it. I got out of it really quickly.
Okay, first question actually, among many. Why Cat in the Machines? What does that mean? Again, to uninitiated.
Great question. I was actually, when I looked at some of the questions before this meeting, I was like, oh, you're curious about why Cat in the Machine.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally am actually. I'm very intrigued because it's on your website and it's also on your wall right now.
So it was actually, I came up with this name well before the website went up when I was just thinking about, ooh, I would love to do podcasts or I would love to do conference speaking. And I was workshopping, like, what would the name of my podcast be? And I went through several iterations and I was like, I want something like to play tongue in cheek to my name because my name's Kat. I also have cats. I foster cats too. So I feel like cat is a really good symbol of me. So I wanted to incorporate my name, but I didn't know how to do it. I was actually thinking of doing coding for cats, which is a handle I've used in other forums. But then as I was workshopping it, I was like, I work on machines and I love software and I really want the focus to be on my work with accessibility and the different machines I work on. So that's where I thought, ooh, I like Cat in the Machines. And funny enough, after a few months went by, I realized that it's the same as Florence and the Machines, the band. So that was funny.
It does feel a lot like a band's name in some aspects.
It was a happy accident. And it started off as just a name for a podcast. But when I was trying to get a personal website spin up, I was looking to see if I could get like the URL Kat Johnson. So
yeah.
I was fiddling around, maybe I can pick a different name. And then I thought of my podcast. I never really started that name. And I said, all right, I'm just gonna name my website Cat in the Machines, and that's what I'm gonna be using as my handle everywhere.
So you've been working at Khan Academy, and let's start there first. What are things that you've been working on that you feel really proud about, especially today? And how has it helped you with your career so far?
Yeah, I think one, I've been really enjoying the move to Khan Academy. Before I came to Khan Academy, I was at Microsoft. It was a really good place for me to start my career, and I really my time at Microsoft, I really realized that I enjoyed the front end development. I can do some back end stuff and it's fine, but I don't really enjoy it that much. Anytime I'm in the front end space, it allows me to focus on accessibility and really get to work with designers and project managers, and really becomes like a multi-discipline space. And that's where I really have the most fun with. But since moving to Khan Academy, it's been really enjoyable to work on our widgets and our practice items that we build for students. And a big feature that we've recently released for Khan Academy is our new interactive graphs. Because before, the interactive graphs weren't keyboard accessible, they didn't have screen reader compatibility. And when I was interviewing for Khan Academy, the thing that really sold me was hearing that they were working on building an accessible graphing experience
Sure.
for a range of users.
Yeah.
Since I joined, they were already in the throes of building this implementation. So I focused on building the polygon experience. And that was like so much fun. And then working with our designers to make it keyboard accessible. And there were so many interesting things to figure out there. I've never thought about how do you make a graph accessible? How do you explain all the pieces of a graph? If you're building a circle, for instance, and the equations to draw a circle, how do you explain that circle and make it as robust as the visual experience?
So this would be, is this something we can see at the moment on Khan Academy?
Let me see if I know a link we can look at. So this is like the polygon experience. So I can tab to it. You can move the whole shape around with your keyboard, or you can.
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah. So this is all through the keyboard. You can maneuver the graph. You can change the shape of the polygon here.
Exactly. And the last area I worked in, I was a tech lead for a component library. And
Okay.
when you're a tech lead for a component library, the people who consume your library are other developers. So for the most part, you're just servicing developers and making sure that the platform they're building, their web experiences, are on an accessible footing. With these widgets for practice experience, the way Khan Academy works is we have educators and content creators who will write exercises, create problems, write up examples that students use. So it's a really interesting that we're building this component library that's typically for developers, but we also are it's being used mostly by educators and people who are writing practice examples. So building this really interesting interactive tool, but also there was an additional layer of creating an editor or updating our editor to convey all these features and functionality that are based in code, but translating that for other content creators to understand how to make a widget accessible, like the alt text, the labels, any other features or functionality that will make the experience more accessible.
So you're maintaining the library, and then you're also using it almost like in the examples here, right? These are like live examples of this library that you've created or you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see this other places around Khan Academy. If you go through the whole library, there are so many courses. If you focus on math and science courses, that's where you'll see most examples of widgets that my team builds for Khan Academy.
Very cool. Yeah, actually, what is the name of the library, if you don't mind? You said it was available to the developers?
Yeah, right now, you definitely have to reach out to us if you wanted to use that, but it is open source, so you can view our codes. Where is it? Yeah.
Perseus.
Yeah, it's called Perseus. And we have a whole description on getting started. Right now, last I checked, we have another company or another group that uses Perseus, but for the most part, it's primarily used by Khan Academy.
I see. So yeah, actually, if you scroll down, let's take a look at it real quick. So I was looking at that description there. So it's a collection of subrepos for showing exercise content. So this is all accessible, right? So you can use the keyboard to navigate, I guess, graphs and charts and plot lines. Is that kind of what this is about?
Yeah, exactly. We have a storybook page. Oh, no. Yeah, this is also available online if you want to look at it. But this shows like all the components, all the widgets that we build for Khan Academy. And some are deprecated and we do not recommend you use, and some are functioning and have been remediated, and so they are quite accessible and we encourage people to use.
Very nice. This is cool. I would love to go through it later and just explore. Oh yeah, so since you're showing me the storybook, maybe demo the storybook a little bit too. I think this is cool.
Yeah, of course. Let me see. So a second ago, I was mentioning that one fascinating aspect of our library is it's used by other content creators. So you can see within our storybook page, here's the editor experience for a graph. For instance, I grab a graph, I can say, there's a lot of settings on a graph.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing that I was thinking about is there are so many settings on this graph. And so again, like I'm curious to how to even navigate this. How did that plot line first get created? Is that just basically what you get from the get-go?
Yeah, this one's not a great example. What's a good example? A polygon example. Yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, so we have many different types of graphs because there's many different use cases that our content creators need for building a really good problem to educate our learners. So
Sure.
like this first type that we have, it's our default-ish type, or it starts there. It's called none type graph. It's basically a non-interactive graph that is primarily used to add locked figures to show, for instance, a diagram of here's a circle and there's like a multiple choice something below, or some sort of, or it's within an article and it's explaining a concept. Versus our polygon, like I was mentioning earlier, these ones are all interactive. So they're all about, they'll probably have a problem that says, hey, draw a polygon that has these points or has this surface area. And then the student will have to move these points around to get the answer right. And then it's checked.
Okay. Okay, so the fact that the student is moving it around is what solves the answer, right? If there was a question about what is a triangle, or yeah, it's actually showing you that there too, right? The correct answer was, and then it shows you those plots. I guess you moved away. Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, like for instance, like you get a problem like draw a circle with a radius of 15. And so then students need to draw a circle that has a radius of 15, which that's when you kind of have to like really crane it over.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, wait, the center is supposed to be a 5, 0. There we go. Yes. I think the funnest part about working for Khan Academy is me having to remember, okay, I remembered this in geometry and trying to remember how to do these older math problems. We try to make them like easier math problems when we're testing out our code, or we know some easy ones testing.
Sure.
It's definitely funny. I'm on. So what was that one show? Are you smarter than a fifth grader? Sometimes I feel, are you smarter?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So this is cool though. Like I feel like I understand a little bit more about some of the work you're doing. This was a cool little demo here. As far as going back to what you're saying about accessibility, when you say accessibility, I think a lot of people think about all kinds of different things. Like the thing that probably most people think about is like the testing library in React, or just writing a bunch of unit tests and then trying to make sure that HTML elements have roles and labels. But what is accessibility in your mind? What, being the expert, what do you think accessibility really means for people out there, and like to a developer, what should they be thinking about when they do accessibility work?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my mind, accessibility is really just imagine you're writing your code and you're thinking of like the circle of users that your code will work for. That how you wrote it, the implementation. This is the collection of people that it will work for and they'll be able to use your experience. And accessibility allows us to expand that circle and stretch it to include more people than
Mm.
we are aware of. Because a lot of thinking about accessibility is creating awareness and understanding of all the ways people interact with the world. Like, not everyone can hear. So if you're only doing notifications that are sound based with no visual indicator, you're probably missing out on a large swath of people. Or if it's all visual and you focus only on visual implementation and don't wire it up correctly using semantic HTML, it's not going to work for people who use screen readers who are visually impaired. And thus, you're really not allowing a lot of people to be able to use your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the libraries out there that can help with making websites more accessible? What are the ones that what are your go-tos?
That's a good question. For the most part, I typically recommend people just having some sort of automated accessibility scans within their testing framework. Will that catch everything that could possibly happen accessibility wise? No. There's a lot of accessibility issues that you only really find if you do some form of manual testing. But at least the automated scans will catch the really low hanging fruit that's really baked into the HTML markup. So if you have that, you're at least making sure that you added an ARIA label to that.
Right.
You did mark up your list correctly, that all these things are at a good floor. So then if there's other accessibility issues, it doesn't require like a huge refactoring of all of your code to get it
Right.
at least clean semantic HTML.
So you would say the first step really is to make sure that you have the clean semantic HTML, and that would mirror I guess there's a website for, I think it was W3. Are you aware of it? I think it was W3 accessibility forums.
Yes, yeah. I'm actually part of a W3C community group that focuses
Mhm.
on cognitive accessibility. So this is my bread and butter. I love W3C and by extension their WCAG guidelines that goes over accessibility standards.
There's also Ally. What is the difference between Ally and then W3C?
A11Y is a general term. Basically, it's just saying accessibility without saying accessibility. You just say ally. And it's just a general acronym used in the accessibility community just as a shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
Is terms like W3C. W3C is just a large organization.
Right.
The acronym that it stands for, but it's World Wide Web Consortium.
Sure.
And then WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or international research guidelines for standards for accessibility that are reasonable expectations or reasonable standards that every company and developer should be able to meet, at least to AA compliance level.
Okay, going back a step here, the first thing to do when you're building websites or your apps for people is to create it for the circle that you're working on, and then from there you want it to become more accessible, so you start looking at places like W3C and A11Y or Ally, and you just try to make sure that you are in tune with the things that they say are industry standard. Is that kind of safe to say here as a good recap?
Yeah, I would adjust that slightly to say it's W3C, specifically their WCAG guidelines that aim to expand that circle. Focus on those guidelines and those definitions, because those guidelines were written up to expand the circle to meet reasonable accommodations for people that are pretty well agreed upon.
Do you feel like front end nowadays in 2025 do you feel like accessibility is like a large part of front end work as well? It's like a core component?
I think so. I think about when I was in college, which at this point, I'm like, wow, it's been this long since I was in college, like
Yeah.
8+ years ago. But I
Yeah.
remember 8+ years ago, not much conversation around accessibility. I remember teaching because I was a teacher's assistant in college. So I taught web programming while I was getting my degree. And I remember teaching a web development course, just an introductory one, introducing people to like, what is HTML? What is CSS? And explaining to students that like, hey, HTML is important because it's really important to use a heading tag over a div because a div doesn't include the semantic meaning as that. And then from there, I like in college where people rarely talked about it or it was always like a footnote and things. As time has gone on, I feel there's more awareness from developers that we need to build things to be accessible. What I've noticed now is the desire to make things accessible is up here. Everyone knows it's important. And the knowledge to do that is slowly starting to catch up with that.
Really, yeah, it's really low actually. I think this is a classic thing, like when you go from company to company, everybody does want to make their apps accessible. But then like when we say, oh, okay, we want to work on this during a sprint or an upcoming sprint, it's almost like everybody is like rolling their eyes a little bit and they're like, I want to work on cool features. These are things I think like people don't want to do. And partly the reason for that, I feel like I just giving you some background from my own experience, essentially. I think the reason people like groan about accessibility, especially, is that it's hard in some ways to remember all the things you need to do. I feel like you have to go and look or spend like a couple like hours with some of these websites and just go back and look at HTML semantics, like you said. Oh, divs. You shouldn't really be using just generic divs if it has more semantic meaning, like it's an article or a section. And I think a lot of nowadays, a lot of people are like so used to using React to generate the HTML that it became like harder to remember this stuff. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I totally get that frustration from developers. I wrote up like an idea for a talk that was like accessibility, don't overthink it. Because so often developers, I've noticed, they get into accessibility and they either it's super frustrating or they're super excited to do it, but they do it like all in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Many mistakes I made early in my career around accessibility was conflating what a screen reader reads out or gets focused on versus like a keyboard user. And this time our website, we were trying so hard to make it super accessible. And also we put tab stops all over the place to be like, look, it's so accessible. You can use it with your keyboard and your screen reader. Instead of realizing, oh wait, a screen reader can navigate the page just fine. Don't add tab stops everywhere. But going back to your original point, like that frustration around like developers about like all the things to remember, how to do it correctly. That's where that recommendation around like lightweight, like using the X core to run on your unit test is a really nice lightweight way to double check that the semantics are written correctly. So then like developers don't need to memorize all the semantics or have to memorize all the things that needs to happen. Because even though I've spent many years as an accessibility expert and I've taken tests related to accessibility and tested my memorization and understanding of semantic HTML, I still forget like certain things that are neat to make something work semantically within HTML, within the browser, and also depending on your screen reader. So those automated tools really help create that buffer right there. But if I could expand or give any recommendations to people who are wanting to do accessibility or frustrated by accessibility, it's usually my typical recommendations like you're probably thinking about it too hard. Take a step back. It's usually a lot easier than you think. And especially if you're using other component libraries around the web, a lot of those component libraries for like buttons, markups for your site will focus on accessibility. So as long as you're using your component libraries correctly, you hopefully will get a lot of things accessible out of the box. Fluent UI at Microsoft, like I know several developers who work on that component library who are very dedicated to accessibility and really good experts in accessibility. And they write their components to be as accessible as much as they can.
I see. Okay. So that's actually a good point that you make, right? If you use like a popular UI library, for example, MUI or something like that, you get accessibility right out of the box. You don't have to worry as much about creating all of the stuff from scratch as if you were to do it on your own.
Unless you are building a component library and if you're creating something, usually you should be fine as long as you're doing like buttons, links, lists, like things that are like rudimentary components around the web. There's usually well-documented examples on how to build those things with accessibility. The area that you get into like really sticky territory is when you create a really custom, very unique component or widget. That's where like here at Khan Academy, we're building this accessible graph experience. It really started posing the question of what is an accessible graph? How do you mark it correctly? How is it going to work with various different screen readers? Either different screen readers, different browsers, different operating systems. Like how can we write this graph to work the best in all those cases? And usually for something that complex, I encourage you to either hopefully have someone on staff that's an accessibility expert to advise and advocate and give feedback on the implementation, or do a lot of research and a lot of, as much as you can, user studies with actual screen reader users to validate or check whether what you built actually makes sense.
Yeah, actually, this is really interesting now. Can you show like some of the tools you mentioned? I think, again, this is just for people who are uninitiated or it's been a while. But so when you say like screen readers, what is that for the most part, right? What is a screen reader on, and is it available on your browser already?
Yeah, there's many different types of screen readers. If you're on Mac OS, you'll use typically like VoiceOver. If you're like on a Windows operating system, people tend to prefer NVDA or JAWS. Or there's Microsoft's out-of-the-box screen reader tool called Narrator. There's many screen readers. If you want to try them out, I encourage you. They're also like a whole tool that requires a lot of learning and education. I'm decently good at using a screen reader, but I'm nowhere near as good as someone who uses it in their day-to-day lives to navigate their phone or their computer or any other device.
Let's say you want to make accessibility the thing you want to get good at this year. Like, what would you say is really important to do first?
If you're already working as a developer, the best way is to just be the one to volunteer to fix accessibility bugs. I'm a big believer in a little bit of trial by fire, not with too many risks, but if there's some small accessibility bugs you have on your website, going through and fixing them, resolving them, and looking up what's wrong is a really handy way to start learning and building the skills for tackling accessibility bugs. If you're someone who's more of like a book learner and wants to read all the nitty-gritty details, if you go on W3C and their WCAG documentation, the WCAG guidelines are so detailed. They're so detailed on all like the areas that are common accessibility issues and definitions for how to make the web accessible. But they also go into so much more detail about like why they wrote them that way, their process around it. So I think either picking up accessibility bugs or reading the online documentation through W3C is probably the best way you can go.
Very cool. So I think like that's also one thing that I feel like in this 2025, when a lot of people are saying the industry it's harder to find work, I think this is like one area where if you shine, you do really well, or you start working at making things more accessible. That actually might be like a really good thing to put on your resume, because again, I feel like a lot of teams want to just work on features. That's what's cool to the organization. And I get that features for apps and websites and all this stuff are the things that are shiny to people and will sell. But then right after you get them to use the app or the website, if it's not a good experience, especially if it's not accessible, you're going to lose a lot of people. And you could even get sued too, right? I think that's a bigger thing these days, right? Like you have to, if accessibility, you can help your company kind of avoid certain lawsuits.
Exactly. That's something that I think that's helped with the awareness around accessibility in developer space over the past several years, is that a lot of organizations have put more effort into suing larger companies, larger websites that can afford to pay for hire experts in accessibility doing it. So that suing, that option of saying, hey, this is a public utility, you're not making this accessible and I'm not able to access your goods, is a really good way of going about it.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last part of your question, but
I was just, again, like I was saying, that it seems like a very overlooked but important thing to focus in on, and especially for the newer people, like learning web development. Like we established, right, this is definitely something that is now like more important for a front end role. And again, if companies, even though if they want to work on things that are like more friendly and more feature, like more fun, I guess that's the best way to put it, like more fun and interesting to work on, like building features, and they overlook this, they're probably going to result in experiences that are not great for a lot certain people, which could lead to lawsuits. And this made me think a little bit about a company that I was working at, especially in like the healthcare medical industry, because you're going to have a lot of people who don't necessarily have the ability to navigate websites like most people can. All this is really important. And all this is really just to say, right, like ultimately we're trying to talk about the skills that are really important in 2025. I think this is a big one. If you care to add any more to that, would be great.
Yeah, fully agree. I think nowadays it's so much more expected from developers to, you don't need to know everything about making everything accessible, but you should understand the importance of like why it's important to use semantic HTML.
Mhm.
And I agree so much with you about a lot of people like to work on features, but it's also important to understand like the compliance aspect. I'm a
Right.
compliance junkie. I think for the most part, I've always worked in like a front end infrastructure type of role or near the front end infra teams in my companies. So I'm always one for encouraging people to compliance
Come to compliance.
or for all the other developers to build all these cool things and be the consistent thread in the organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it probably is like fun thing to do once you get into the hang of it. So what do you see yourself, like where do you see yourself in a couple of years? What are things you want to work on now? Because now we've talked a little bit about like your background and like the tools you use, but where do you see yourself like in a couple of years and maybe the longer term with all this?
Yeah, great question. I know for myself, I want to get more into writing articles, documenting my knowledge, documenting the information, educating other developers a little bit more. I'm working with I mentioned our internal W3C cognitive accessibility group. We have a sub meeting for writing articles, and we're all trying to get better at writing articles about how to build sites to help people that are more inclusive, people with ADHD or people with learning disabilities,
Sure.
or also talking about lived experiences of developers with ADHD or other development learning disabilities or cognitive disabilities, and
Right.
better in writing articles. So writing articles is a big focus of mine over the next several years. I also want to become an engineering manager and see how that goes. Maybe I'll love it. Maybe I'll hate it. Maybe I'll just go back to being a senior developer. But yeah, other than that, like probably podcasting at some point. I won't set exact deadlines because it's not a high priority this year, but maybe in several years. But overall, just expanding my knowledge. Right now, most of my focus has been on accessibility, but I've been really interested in some friends of mine who work in the climate conservation space and use data to help with conservation efforts. So
Oh yeah.
into the accessibility, but also like efficiency and energy uses. How can we build websites to be more efficient instead of requiring so much loading of data and bandwidth. So that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
from a
That's
new
interesting.
area that I'm trying to branch into.
So a couple questions there, right? So for the first part of what you were saying that you wanted to make things more accessibility for people with symptoms like ADHD, I guess one question is how do you know like what you're doing is helping? Are you spending time with people who are neurodivergent or ADHD? Are you learning like what are their struggles, or do you sit with them and ask, or what is that experience like?
A combination of things. It's one like having people that are neurodivergent to work with, but also it's like looking at the research too about what are things that are helpful for people who are neurodivergent on a website and what things like slow people down or predatory design structures that can be really challenging and are unduly harmful for people with different cognitive neurodivergent disabilities. That's actually a big thing we're trying to get an article out for. So hopefully you'll see that within this year.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to hear. I think it's a huge space to be in, and sometimes like when I'm thinking about it myself, right? Again, like I'm partially like I'm more or less actually in the feature development world than building things that are super accessible. But every time I come back to the space, I'm always just like curious about things that are going on and how people actually come to creating tools that are very accessible. I guess it's like you said, though, ultimately it's there's a consortium, there's WCAG, there's Ally, and there's also research, like you're saying, like that all together tie in and give people who are less initiated with this world like some context.
Because did all the studying for an accessibility exam recently. And just through that exam, like learning all the different types of disabilities out there, all these different categories that I was not aware of. So it's not fair to expect developers to understand every type of disability and what are the reasonable accommodations.
I guess the other piece that you were talking about, like ultimately too, is energy and conservation. And this is a good way for me to just bring up AI. AI is like the thing right now that is definitely changing the industry. It's something that everybody wants me to ask about on every one of these meetups or coffee chats that we have. But one thing about AI is that it is actually really helpful at building things for you, even like writing code and building accessible websites. I will say though, it uses a lot of energy. So maybe it's not good for conservation efforts because you see all the work they're doing now to create like these nuclear reactors all over the world to supply the energy to be able to run the AI. But I guess your thoughts.
Yeah, my thoughts on AI. Yeah, I did a whole talk this past fall. That was the one at React Summit US, which was AI and accessibility. There's a lot to talk about. So ending on
Sure.
this, there's so much to say about it and also so little time. I would say in general, if I could boil down how I feel about AI, is that AI is a tool. There's certain use cases where AI can be really helpful, and there's some instances where AI is really unhelpful. So I think about within my own work and flow, as an example, I detest writing emails, but usually there's such like low effort, like low stakes things. So I typically will use AI to write me an email that does blank, and then I will just like
Right.
it, and that helps cut down the time I'm spend writing emails when I'd rather spend more time like talking about accessibility, writing my next talk, doing my own development work. Like it helps make me more efficient in certain areas. So in that way, AI is really helpful. The
Right.
thing that I don't care for is a lot of companies, places that build AI tools, making grandiose claims about what these AI tools can do. Bar none, they cannot replace people. They cannot, they like AI tools can be helpful for giving some developer suggestions on how to write code that works semantically with HTML and writing good semantic HTML. AI cannot write, is not a replacement for accessibility experts, knowledge experts, developers. Like I really detest hearing rhetoric around AI will replace our need to hire developers because
Yeah.
AI is just a really smart mimicking tool. It's really good at mimicking, seeing patterns in a lot of the data it's seen, and regurgitating and trying to give its results based on the information it knows about you. And that is really helpful, but that's not a replacement for people. And that's, I think, the piece of AI that I really hate hearing about. I think it's going away. I'm hearing less noise about it replacing people, but I still hear that sometimes around, like, for instance, all those screenwriter guild strikes about use AI, I'll replace a screenwriter for this show.
Yeah, I'm aware of that actually, and I think I'm in the same boat as you. I honestly feel that companies definitely are like making wild claims about AI and saying it's going to be able to do everything, especially in the next 10 years. But I see it more like you're saying, right? It's more just there to help you remember things, or maybe as a little, like a soft tutor, but it can't really replace like people's expertise, especially, and creativeness, like for solving a lot of the issues that most people have. It's more just like a good way to remember things, or a regurgitator, if you will, like you said. But I ultimately am in the same thought process as you. I think that it can only aid. It's not meant to replace. Replacing is just, that's absurd for a lot of people at this time.
That's a big reason why I'm so happy to work for Khan Academy. Like, the AI tools my company is putting out, I feel a lot better about because we have a good healthy mix of like people who are really pro AI in our company, and some people who are like AI skeptics, no, never. And so I feel like that comes together for us to try to create AI tools that are helpful and away from things that aren't helpful. With our tool Conmigo and the AI chatbot, like, it's the times I've used it, I've been quite happy with its results. We don't make grandiose claims on what it can do. It's just, you can chat with it and can give you suggestions on try this for solving a math problem. It's really tightly scoped to helping students, helping with school assignments, instead of this chat GPT in the beginning being like, it can answer any question you have and it can do anything. We're very much just a nice little tutor that can help you with your assignment, and they don't do much more than that.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for AI in general, is just being there to help tutor things. And that is a great tie-in, especially even for accessibility. Again, right? Like, a lot of developers or even new people may not know these like things or how to use it. So having AI there help you learn to be more accessible, I feel like that's a really good win for AI. And just ultimately too, I think it's a great space for people in general to like work in, because they're going to be able to contribute like more towards like bettering these things, right? Because again, I'd say it's 2025, accessibility has made a lot of strides, but there's probably, you think, like you would probably say too, like there's probably a lot more work to be done, right?
Oh yeah, there's so much more work to be done. Thankfully, I think so many sites have gone on making things accessible, and a lot of developers, as they're going through school, going through coding camps, they're learning how important accessibility is and how to write semantic HTML, versus we're catching up from the like maybe decade of slap divs and spans. We're like bouncing back from that logic that was around for so long. And I think there's more experiences that are clunky. There's more experiences that could use some love to make it accessible. But I feel really hopeful for the place we're at right now.
All right, perfect. I wanted to say again, thank you for your time. I know like we went over a few minutes here, but I guess like for closing thoughts and maybe just recap, like how do people find you, and what are some talks like that you would recommend them if they wanted to continue learning about your work and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Kat Johnson, you can see me on my website, catandthemachines.com. I post a lot more frequently on LinkedIn, but I do have a Blue Sky account and I prefer interacting with people there. If you want to check out any of my previous talks, I did a big talk at React Summit US last November, and that was all about AI and accessibility. So if you're really interested in the AI and accessibility stuff, I have a talk there.
Thanks for this chat today. It was really fun getting to know you and just hearing about your work. And I hope, actually, like in the future, we can have you talk about some more of those tools because it was really great to just see you deep dive. And maybe that could become like a meetup in some upcoming months here.
Yes, and I definitely want to get back to you guys about that meetup. It was definitely we started talking right before I went into like my crammed study mode for it's called the CPAC exam. And so I've just been radio silent for the past like 5 months. But I'm so glad you guys mentioned this coffee chat and we should continue to talk so I can come and do a workshop or a talk about the other things I do.
That would be excellent. Okay, so we'll reach out to you again, like via the calendar. And yeah, just excited. And after this too, I'm gonna watch some of your videos and get more educated here.
Thanks.
Have a great Friday, and I'll talk to you later, Kat. Thanks. It
Yep.
was
See you later.